Hey everybody, welcome to the latest video. So in this video we are working on, this is a commission, single model commission, so we're going to do it to a good high tabletop standard. It's Adrax Agatone. I've got to stop calling him Adrax Agatone. I did that on Instagram a little bit and had to edit the posts. Anyway, so you'll see a slightly odd subassembly. Or it might be a slightly odd subassembly for you, but you can get the head attached to the cloak and then build everything else as well. Now I've got complete access to absolutely everything, so if you do want to do this little subassembly, it is quite straightforward. Just make sure that the glue is on the back of the cloak when you put the head on. Get it in the right position and then take the cloak off, and you can kind of hold it in there until the glue sets. So you'll see the paints that we've got on the wet palette. We've got Nocturne Green, we've got Black Green from Vallejo, and then the darker one is Nocturne Green with a little bit of black. Now I ended up not really using that because the black green is very translucent, so it's not so opaque. Doesn't make a particularly heavy mark once it's dried, so you can probably get away. Well, you can easily get away with just the Nocturne Green and then the black green, and then we're going to add a little bit of Warpstone Glow in later on. So the three colours. It's always good to have like three colours when you're doing this kind of sketching in of the highlights. But you'll see there that kind of Nocturne Green and black is not it isn't very tonally different to black itself anyway, so don't worry too much about the Nocturne Green and black. Just use Nocturne Green, Black Green, Vallejo Black Green, and then the Warpstone Glow. Now the Black Green is a very good mid-tone, so I do kind of recommend getting that one. You can sort of getting away. One of the things that I did do is a 50-50 Nocturne Green and Warpstone Glow. I have done that in the past on some of my Necron weapons, so you can kind of get away with that. Anyway, what we're doing, if you've watched the Flesh Terror video, you'll kind of know this technique of just kind of scribbling and marking down some rough light placements. So where the light is going to be hitting, working on some light volumes. The easiest way to kind of spot this is holding it under a lamp, and like we said in the last video, once you do hold it under the lamp and you do see where that highlight is, just make sure you're making the highlight bigger, because then we can glaze it back. Right, so there's a few mistakes that I make on this as well. So the top of the shin pads, I start painting those green. They end up being gold, so don't worry about those. So yeah, scribbling down some highlights here. This is making sure that we're getting everything green, so we don't have to worry too much about this particular step. You can just kind of replace this with Nocturne Green and do a slightly smaller area. I do make this little tilt plate. I do make this green as well. I know it's black in the box art, however, because this model is going to be very high contrast, I thought the more green that we can get on the model, the better, just to kind of show it off. I do really like painting this kind of high contrast thing. So these little pads here, the hip plate, that's a perfect example of how much highlighting you're wanting to do. So it was just a little scoot down the edge, so that's how much the light is going to be bending around that plate, and making those nice small light volumes. And the light volumes are all they will always be following the shape of the thing that they're on. The shin pads that we're doing there, you've obviously got that knee pad, which is going to be a nice round because it's nearly a sphere. So I'm just kind of scribbling in very roughly a nice kind of round, a nice round circle for the highlight on that. Now the highlights, because Again, I like doing my highlights, the light source being from camera right, so that's where the light source is going to be. So when you're doing those shin pads, just make sure that you are leaning that highlight over to one side. The same with this little highlight up here, it's going to be more towards the front than it is to directly on the top. All these little circle highlights, they're all going to be favouring one side a little bit more than the other. There we go, so we're hitting the top of that knee pad there. We don't need to do that at all. So as we're kind of clicking on and ticking all of these, we're paying attention to how the paint dries. Like I say, the black green does tend to dry a lot darker than when you're putting it on, and you need to be a little bit more aggressive than you think. Like I've said before, with the highlights on this, so that you can then glaze them back. If you're too small, once you've glazed them back, you end up with very little room for a transition, and you may as well at that point you may as well have just edge highlighted it, because you kind of take away so much of the highlight line anyway. So when we go onto the back of the model, we're working on the back of the model here. It's important to kind of still pay attention to where the light is going to be coming from. So the light is still going to be coming from the camera right, but obviously when you turn the model round, it's then coming from camera left. So I'm making sure that the left hand side of the model is going to be predominantly highlighted. This is a little bit of bounce highlights coming in on that side. Remember, there's a cloak across here as well, so we don't have to be overly careful about where we're putting it. It's going to be a lot in shadow anyway, so we're not going to be taking those highlights up anything like as bright as we are on the front, but they still need to be there. It's important that it's good practice as well when you're doing things on the back as well, just to make sure that you're getting the idea of the bounce highlights and where the highlight's going to be bouncing up from the floor. So the lines down the back of the legs that we did there, they were straight lines because the legs are just cylinders, so they're just going to have a straight highlight line straight down the centre. Now the black green, I'm just going it back in again. So once it's all dried, I had a quick look at it to see where it was, and I'm just expanding. I actually moved that highlight on that left knee pad. I moved that a little bit further over to the right hand side. It was a little bit too upward facing, if you like, so I've just moved that one a little bit. I got a little bit of black green in the recess there, so I'm just kind of scrubbing that out with a paintbrush. Easy when it's still wet. You can just kind of drag that paint out of the recess and keep that panel line still there. Now the chest is it's heavily covered in cables, but you're still going to be able to you still need to make sure that the chest is definitely going to be green. So although the highlights on the chest are going to be smaller, they're still going to need to go up to a bright green. So there's going to be like a spot highlight of moot green on the chest, just to kind of pull the eye up to the head. Again, that's that nice broad highlight line on that hip plate again. So yeah, on that chest piece, because it's up towards the head, we need to make sure that those small parts which are showing between the cables still get a nice bright highlight on them. So I made the black green a little bit larger on the chest piece that's showing out, ready for the moot green and the edge highlight up there as well. That can keep the interest towards the top side, because otherwise the top side is just going to end up being all sorts of gold and silver. So we need a little bit of green just to tie that in as well, and keep the interest up towards the head. I'm still not decided what colour to do the skin on this model. I might drop the person who I'm doing the commission for, drop him a message and find out exactly what kind of skin colour he wants, whether he wants a darker skin colour or not. And the other thing on this one as well, I wasn't quite sure what colour to do the hammer, but as we get through the video and you see the gold coming out, I thought a gold hammer would really tie back in actually quite well. So that highlight that I've just put on, you can actually see if you rewind the video and just watch as I position it there, you can see that highlight running down the side of that shin pad. So that's what you need to be looking for when you're sketching in these highlights, trying to find where the light is landing. Get the light above the model, turn the model to how you want it to be positioning, try to keep that model consistent every time you look for the highlights. So don't kind of twist it around and then see where the highlights are and then move it into a slightly different position to see where the highlights are on the other leg. Try to keep it in the same position. And this nice high contrast style of painting is really ties in well to this sort of highlights as well, to being able to see them a lot more than the kind of Games Workshop Heavy Metal style of edge highlighting everything to show off all the details on the model. There'll still be some edge highlighting on this, but we're not kind of painting it green and then edge highlighting every single panel. We're having a little bit more light direction, which I find a lot more interesting anyway, just in general. So we're coming up to the end of finishing off the green, and you'll see we've only been painting for what are we on now, 12 minutes. So we've only been kind of sketching the lighting in for about 12 minutes, and once this whole model once we've kind of finished this stage, you can have a look at the model and you can see that it's actually, because the light direction is so strong, you actually end up with quite an interesting looking model just from this sketching part. The refining and then that final highlight will come afterwards. We need to get a few more colours on so that we can see what we're looking at. And the next colour is going to be gold, so we're going to start doing some of the gold trim. A little bit of bounce highlights on the undersides of some of the panels. And that little bounce highlight again on the inside of that rear shin pad. Now, one thing I did forget was the back of the ankles and the ankle guards on this one, so I did go back and do that afterwards off screen. But so that's all the green kind of sketched in. You can see once we get it turned up to the light, you can kind of see the green there as well. But now to help pop it a little bit further, we've got some warpstone glow, because we do want it a little bit more contrast for the initial kind of sketch. So this is some warpstone glow. Now warpstone glow is atrocious at coverage. It's a really bad covering paint, but that's good for this style of painting because we can build up the brightness and the saturation very easily. So you can see the brush has slowed down a little bit now. We're using very small amounts of paint on the brush. Still stippling, still kind of sketching on, trying to keep a little bit of texture and interest, and these marks, just like the Necron when we were doing the Necron blue, we can start looking at the marks and making them a bit more interesting and textured later on through highlights and shadows. So the easiest way to kind of explain, I do go to a smaller paintbrush now. So the easiest way to explain where these ones go, if you've already done the sketched highlights, just make this a slightly bit smaller size on the light volume. So that part on the chest plate there, that's the perfect example of where I was saying that still needs to be quite a nice vivid green to so that it doesn't all get lost in the shadows up on that chest plate. So we put quite a lot of warpstone glow up on that little piece of chest plate that was sticking out. And the warpstone glow, you can start adding spots here and there to draw the details around. So the the little panels on the upper thighs, the funny little vent on just there where my brush is now, that funny little vent, you can start adding a little bit onto there to start showing that off a bit more. So you can start using the warp zone glow to sell some of the details here and there, and don't make it too bright though, so don't add too much. We want to, the warp zone glow is pretty much going to be the top highlight for the vast majority of the model. We are going to be using moot green as well, but the moot green is going to be reserved for either very, very sharp edges or parts that are higher up on the model. So like I was saying, we're going to need to do a little bit on that chest plate, just a tiny bit on the chest plate, just to lift the brightness of the chest. Around the gorge, the fingers, fingertips and things like that, and the tops of the hip plates, those sort of edges are going to be ones that are going to be hit by the moot green, and then they're going to be glazed back as well quite a fair bit. So this, even though we're still sort of sketching it all in, we're trying to be a little bit neater with these marks for the warp stone glow. But like I said, because it's such a transparent paint and it hasn't really got very good coverage, it's a really good paint for this step, because it doesn't really matter. It kind of does, but it doesn't really matter how heavy a mark you make, because it's going to fade and blend with the underlying layer anyway. So you see there, I just put a massive dot on the inside of that shield, and as it dries, it will just kind of blend in with the heavy green from underneath it, or the black green. Sorry, black green. Don't forget the feet. Again, they've got those little circle or rounded surfaces, so that the highlight on there is going to be a dot. And all the little edges facing upward. Now those edges going around the sorry, my messages are going crazy. I need to turn that off. The edges going around the boots. That's going to be another really good edge to be able to show the light direction. So you can highlight all the way around that edge. You can kind of edge highlight all the way around it, but the brightest of the edge highlight is only going to be sort of, because the lighting is at camera right, it's going to be from about 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock sort of thing. That's going to be the brightest point of that highlight. And here you can see how translucent that this paint is, because we're just absolutely scribbling a highlight across the top and then a highlight down the back of the leg. So yeah, it's very, very good for kind of softening these in. Again, the back, if you want to do this back to front, and you want to start on the back and see if you've got the highlights in the right place, then you can do that, because obviously the back is going to be covered predominantly by the cloak. And then have a look at the back and see how that sits with you before you take it round to the front. You'll see that we've got like a primary highlight here that we're scribbling on there, and then that little bounce highlight from the light bouncing off the floor and hitting the inside of that calf plate. A little bit too much paint there, but yeah, it's just a big highlight and then a scribble down, big mark at the top and then a scribble down, and the warp stone glow just kind of blends and softens it all in as well. And this works with absolutely any colour. You've seen me do it with red. The red one we mix a little bit of black in with the base colour. You generally need about 3 colours to be able to do this, so you need a good dark base colour, a nice mid-tone, and then a good saturated highlight. As long as you've got this highlight which is saturated, and it's a very rich colour. So if you were doing orange, then you would start with brown, and you'd make sure that this highlight here was proper orange, something like Fire Dragon Bright or something. So you'd go through there, If you're using the game colour range, there's orange fire, so it does apply to any colour. I've got hiccups, I do apologise. It does apply to any colour, as you've seen with the red. We've done the red from the Flesh Terror, and you've just seen me in the last video. You just seen me do the blue on my Necrons as well, and that blue works because that third colour is a very, very bright, like saturated blue. So last little bit of the video for you today. We've mixed up a little bit of gold. So this is my favourite way of painting gold. It's Victorian brass with a little bit of black in it. So mix it in. The black, as I've said before, the black just drops the gloss level of the metallic down and takes that shine out of it. So the mix that I've got on the palette there, you'll see on the top side of it, well, maybe you can see on the top side of it, it's not quite as well mixed, so there's still a little bit of a brighter Victorian brass on there. So you'll see me kind of sketching in some highlights with a bit of a brighter Victorian brass mix in a little bit. I promise I am painting the trim here gold, and I'm painting it very, very well and very, very neatly. But this gold is it's the same gold as I've been painting on the Necrons as well. So it's this Victorian brass and black, and you can glaze it over with a little bit of Corvus black as well, just to push the light direction if you need to into the shadows. That little highlight there, that is a little bit more of a pure Victorian brass. So that was the bit that was got from the unmixed end, and you'll see me following the highlights down from the green and just making sure that part of the gold is a little bit brighter. Same here, look, so I've got a little bit more of that, and it's just catching the top side and the bottom side where it'll be a little bit brighter, and then we'll go back in with the gold that's mixed a lot more with the black, and is a lot more darker. Now I think on the box art this part here that I'm painting is green, but I know I said that I needed to make sure that the breastplate was bright enough green, so that it didn't get lost, and you would probably think that I should paint that bit green as well, but the detail and the difference between having that as gold trim, I think will just really, really pay off in the end. Nice fine highlights of gold will show that as a little bit more of a regal. I think the box art looks a little bit too green, to be honest. And this would obviously work really, really well with Dark Angels as well, although I would probably go a little bit colder with Dark Angels, so I would maybe pick a slightly different green for the base tones for Dark Angels. If I was going to use Dark Angels, maybe something like Incubi Darkness might work quite well as a base tone for Dark Angels. A little bit of a colder green. So around all these rivets here as well, what we will do is we will kind of get a little bit of a Corvus black glaze, so that we can add some shadows to those rivets. So don't worry about trying too carefully to paint around them or anything. Just kind of get this gold on, and this is a really important stage because it shows just how bright the model is going to look in the end. So you can then balance it out. So for instance, the loincloth, I didn't quite know whether I was going to paint the loincloth the same colour as the cloak, which is going to be a nice deep red and orange, or whether to do it black. And after I've got all this gold base tones on, I have decided it's going to be the same colour as the cloak, so it's going to be red as well, or that nice deep red, just to bring up the front a little bit. Add some interest to the front. So this is the kind of the less mixed in Victorian brass, slightly brighter, hasn't got as much black in it, It's not something I normally do, it's just that I noticed it was there on the palette. I thought I'd make use of it while it was there. It's literally the top side is just not, you can actually see it separating there now as well. You can see the top side is not quite as, it hasn't got quite as much black mixed into it. When you are adding these little bright highlights on, just make sure they're following the highlights of the armor that you've already put on. So the easiest one to explain that is the ones across the knee pads. So you've got that green highlight that's running down the shin and the thigh, and then put the nice gold highlight, the bright highlight on that is going to be in a line with those that highlight line that's running down the thigh and the shin. And exactly the same with this little I don't know what that is really, but it's a little shield on there. I think it's probably a buckle for the cloak or something. A little prested. That highlight of the green, just make sure that it's matched with the gold as well. So the top side of this little dragon symbol on his chest, or his belt buckle, is very large belt buckle. Exactly the same thing here. I've got this brighter gold which I'm trying to keep towards the top side, any edges which are pointing upwards, and then I get the darker mix and pull that down into the depths, into the recesses. Now try to keep some of the recesses in here black, so that you've got some contrast to play with later. It doesn't matter if you slip and get a little bit in there, because we can glaze a little bit of black. If you're going to glaze black in, I would use Abaddon black. Don't use Null Oil. Null Oil's really good. However, if you're trying to glaze into recesses a little bit to darken the recesses, it can dry a little bit white on occasions. It's just the way that the pigments settle as it dries. It kind of shows the medium a little bit more than the pigments. So I would use Abaddon black just to run in, just water down some Abaddon black and run it into the recesses if you have slipped a little bit with the gold. But you need to keep that contrast so that you can then pick the highlights out with some Model Air Chrome later on, and keep that light direction nice and strong. So you can see the lighting is already looking quite interesting. We've got the gold that's nice and bright in certain areas, just making sure that we're ticking the upper edges, really paying attention to where the curves are going. So if the curve is going down and facing downwards, it's probably not going to be catching as much light as a curve that's coming upwards. So that's a little bit of a bounce highlight on that bottom corner. On that bottom corner there as well, and then that edge there is going to be very bright, whereas the parts of the bottom of the shin pad where the gold is starting to curve and face very, very strongly down, that's going to stay the very dark base tone, apart from occasional little ticks of a highlight that you can put on. Now the little ticks of highlight that we'll do later, they're almost a rule of cool in terms of their position, because you could say they're bouncing off anywhere. You could say they're bouncing off, like there's a shell, an ammo shell on the floor that is reflecting a little bit of light up back into that particular part of the gold flame or something. But like realistically, very, very little amounts of that gold flame that's facing down towards the floor would start reflecting anything, so it would just be almost black. So we can add in little highlights just to add some interest and show off the detail in there as well. It's the same down here as well. So all these parts here are facing downwards. As you can see, I'm turning it over. So any little highlight ticks that we put there are pretty much just going to be representative of something hitting the ground and just glaring a little bit of sunlight back into it. A little bit of brighter gold on the panels which are facing upwards again. There we go, we are nearly there. So what are we on? We're on 30 minutes, so it's taken half an hour to get all the green and predominantly all the gold sketched out in a good strong lighting style. It's helped define what colours are going to be some of the other nondescript areas, like the loincloth. The hammer is definitely still going to be gold, so I've already sketched the hammer in, and it does look really good gold, so we can make the hammer look very, very contrasty as well. We might do a little bit of OSL on the face of the hammer, but we'll see. So the last little bit of the chains here, and then the small hammer that's hanging off. We can make. I might make that hammer very, very clean gold, as if it's been very, very well looked after. So we might brighten that one small hammer up, like a little charm that's hanging off his charm bracelet that's around his belt. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching this one. That is how Adrax Agatone is looking at the moment, and we will be back shortly to refine all that. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Take care.